It's 7 in the morning and you're already angry. The alarm clock rang, you hit snooze 3 times, and now you're late again. You jump out of bed irritated, unable to cope, cursing under your breath while stumbling around looking for your clothes. On the way to work, someone cuts you off in traffic and that's it. The rest of your self-control goes out the window. You yell in the car, honk the horn, feel your heart racing, that burning sensation rising in your chest. And then you stop and think, wait, why am I like this? Why did something so small completely throw me off balance? And the answer is simple and brutal. You're not in control. You think you're living your life, but in reality you're a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. Your mood is controlled by traffic. Your self-esteem is controlled by likes on social media. Your peace is controlled by the opinions of people you barely know. Your productivity is controlled by Netflix that keeps you up until 2 in the morning. So many things control you, except yourself. And this isn't cheap philosophy or motivational speech. It's an accurate diagnosis of what's happening in your mind right now. Henry Ford revolutionized the world when he understood a simple truth about production. He realized that in a disorganized factory, each worker did what they wanted, when they wanted, how they wanted. The result was chaos, waste, and defective products. So Ford created the assembly line, a system where each piece, each movement, each second had a specific purpose. And you know what happened? Production exploded, quality increased, waste decreased. Now look at your mind. It's a factory operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But who is controlling this factory? Who is deciding what goes in, what goes out, what is produced? If you are honest with yourself, the answer is terrifying. Nobody. Your mental factory is running on autopilot, producing random thoughts, uncontrolled emotions, behaviors you don't even recognize as your own. And worst of all, you are accepting all of this as if it were normal, as if you had no choice, as if this were the only way to exist. There is a law that governs human behavior, and the Stoics discovered it over 2,000 years ago. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome, the most powerful man in the known world, wrote in his personal diary a phrase that should be tattooed on your mind. You have power over your mind, not over external events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Let that phrase sink in for a second. The emperor of Rome, commanding legions, controlling territories, with the power of life and death over millions of people, knew that there was only one thing over which he had real control: his own mind. And if the guy who literally ruled the world understood this, what does that say about us, ordinary people, thinking we can control traffic, the weather, other people's opinions, the Instagram algorithm? Now let's get to what really matters. Why can't you control yourself? Why do you know exactly what you should do, but you don't do it? Why do you promise that tomorrow will be different, but tomorrow is always the same? The answer lies in how your biological machine was programmed. Your brain wasn't designed to make you happy. It was designed to keep you alive. And there's a huge difference between those two things. Let's understand the circuit that's sabotaging you right now. In the center of your brain, there's a structure called the limbic system. This is the ancient, primitive part that has existed since your ancestors lived in caves fleeing from lions. The job of this system is simple: seek immediate pleasure, avoid immediate pain, repeat what is already known. That's why you pick up your cell phone without thinking. That's why you eat that sweet even though you know you shouldn't. That's why you stay in bed instead of going to exercise. Your limbic system is screaming, danger, effort, discomfort. Stay where you are, it's safe here. And the worst part is, it's fast. He acts before you have time to think rationally. Now in the front part of your brain, you have the prefrontal cortex. This is the evolved part, the part that makes you human. It can plan for the future, understand consequences, and make decisions based on values, not impulses. The problem is that it's slow, much slower than the limbic system. It's as if you had two factories inside your head. an old automatic factory that produces instantaneous reactions based on instinct, and a modern factory that could produce quality decisions, but which takes a long time to start the machines. And guess which factory is winning in your life? The old one. The automatic one. The one that doesn't think. Because between the external stimulus and your response, there's a tiny space of time. And in that space, whoever acts first wins. And your limbic system is the world champion of speed. But here's what nobody tells you. That space, that small interval between stimulus and response, is where your freedom resides. That's where you can insert awareness. That's where you can install a quality control system. The Stoics called this the dichotomy of control, a tool so powerful that if you truly understood it, your life would change before the end of this video. The dichotomy works like this. There are things that depend on you, and there are things that don't depend on you. The things that depend on you are your thoughts, your intentions, your reactions, your choices. The things that don't depend on you are literally everything else. The traffic, the weather, what people think of you, whether you'll get promoted, whether that person will respond to you, how much money you'll earn next month. And here's the part that will set you free. You're spending 90% of your energy trying to control things that don't depend on you. And you're spending 10% controlling the only things that truly matter. It's like trying to fix the wrong machine in the factory. You're hammering away, adjusting, yelling at a machine that isn't even yours, while your own machine is just sitting there, rusting, waiting for you to pay attention to it. Let me pause here for a second and ask a question that perhaps no one has ever asked you. What in your life is controlling you more than you'd like? It doesn't have to be something big. It could be your cell phone. It could be the opinion of a specific person. It could be the fear of failure. It could be food. It could be the need for approval. I want you to know one thing. What you're feeling is more common than you imagine. Thousands of people watch this video every day, carrying the exact same weight you carry. If you have the courage, leave a comment telling me what's controlling you. It can be something simple like, I feel controlled by the opinions of others, or I feel controlled by procrastination. Your honesty will make someone else feel less alone today, and sometimes that's exactly what someone needs to hear to take the first step. Now let me continue showing you how to break this pattern. Let's go back to the factory of your mind. Ford had a sacred principle in his production: eliminate waste. Every movement that didn't add value to the final product was cut without mercy. He measured, timed, and optimized every second. Now think about this. How many of your daily thoughts add value to your life? How many of your automatic behaviors are taking you where you want to go? A Harvard University study found that we spend 47% of our time thinking about things that have nothing to do with what we are doing at the moment. 47%, almost half of your life is being wasted on random thoughts, useless worries, and aimless wanderings. If Ford saw a factory operating with that level of waste, he would shut it down that same day. But you are operating your mind exactly like that, and calling it normal. Here's what's happening. Your mind is being hijacked by external forces because you never installed a filtering system. You're letting anything in, any notification, any opinion, any comparison, any advertisement, any drama. And all of that goes straight to your mind's production line, mixing with your own thoughts, creating defective mental products. Anxiety, envy, anger, frustration, insecurity. And you're consuming these defective products as if they were your own, as if you chose to produce them. But you didn't. They were manufactured by an uncontrolled system that you never organized. Epictetus, another Stoic philosopher, was a slave, literally. He had no control over where he slept, what he ate, what he did during the day. He was someone else's property, and yet he uttered one of the most powerful phrases about freedom ever written. No man is free unless he is master of himself. Think about that. A slave, chained, without physical freedom, understood something that most free people never understand. The only real prison is the prison of your own mind. You may be physically free, but if you don't control your thoughts, if you don't control your reactions, if you don't control where you place your attention, you are not free. You are a slave to your impulses. You are a slave to the opinions of others. You are a slave to the algorithm. You are a slave to the last thing you read on Twitter. And the brutal irony is that you hold the key to your own prison. You just don't know how to use it. Here's the good news. Your mind is reprogrammable. Neuroplasticity. That's the technical term that means your brain can change. You're not stuck with the patterns you have today. But here's the bad news. Reprogramming takes work. It takes repetition. It requires you to install new circuits, line by line, day after day, until they become automatic. Ford took years optimizing his assembly line. And you'll need time too. But the difference is that every small adjustment you make to your mind generates immediate returns. Every time you stop, breathe, and choose your response instead of reacting automatically, you're installing a new circuit. Every time you turn off your phone instead of mindlessly scrolling through your feed, you're regaining control. Every time you identify a useless thought and consciously discard it, you're eliminating waste from your mental output. Now let's get to the practical protocol. How do you install this control system in your real life? I'll give you a method that the Stoics used 2,000 years ago and that modern neuroscience confirms works. It's called premeditatio malorum, premeditation of evils. Before Ford built a factory, he mentally simulated every process. He anticipated problems. He thought about where things could go wrong and created solutions before the problem appeared. The Stoics did exactly that with life. Every morning they sat down and asked themselves, what could go wrong today? Who could irritate me? What situation could throw me off balance? And then they pre-programmed their responses, not to avoid problems, but to avoid being caught off guard when they arose. Here's how you put this into practice. Tomorrow morning, before picking up your phone, before starting your day, grab a piece of paper and write down 3 things. First, a situation that will likely irritate you today. It could be traffic, it could be that annoying colleague, it could be a stressful meeting. Second, write down how you normally react to that situation. Be brutally honest. If you yell, write that down. If you ruminate all day, write that down. Third, write down how a Stoic would react, like someone who understands that they can't control the situation, but can control the response. Write down the response that would make you proud of yourself. And then, when the situation happens, and it will, you won't be unarmed. You'll have a mental script, a protocol, a response assembly line that you consciously installed. And you know what happens after 30 days of doing this. You don't need the paper anymore. The circuit is installed. The response has become automatic. You've reprogrammed your biological machine. But there's a deeper part to it, a part that most people avoid because it's uncomfortable. You need to take a brutal inventory of what's controlling you. And I'm not talking about obvious things. I'm talking about the invisible strings, the ones you don't even realize exist. For example, how many decisions do you make based on what people will think? How many times do you stop yourself from doing something you want because you're afraid of other people's reactions? How many times do you act one way in public and another way in private? This isn't about judging you. It's about diagnosing where you're leaking power. Because every time you act based on someone's opinion, you're transferring control of your life to that person. You're making them the chief engineer of your mental factory, and they don't even know it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The opinions of others don't pay your bills. They don't solve your problems. They don't live your life. So why are you giving them so much power?" And the answer is simple. Because we are programmed to seek social approval. Our ancestors needed the group to survive. Being rejected by the group meant death. So our brains developed a hypersensitive sensor for social approval. But here's the problem. This sensor is calibrated for a world that no longer exists. You won't die if someone doesn't like your post. You won't be expelled from the tribe if someone disagrees with you. But your limbic system doesn't know this. It keeps screaming danger every time you feel the slightest sign of rejection. And you, Without realizing it, spend your whole life trying to avoid this false alarm. Here's the antidote. You need to recalibrate your sensor, and the way to do that is through intentional exposure. The Stoics called this voluntary discomfort. You purposefully put yourself in situations where you will be judged, criticized, or rejected. Not in a destructive way, but in a controlled way. For example, you post an honest opinion knowing that some people will disagree. You say no to a request, even knowing that the person might get upset. You do something you want to do, even if it seems strange to others. And then you observe. You observe that the world doesn't end. You observe that people continue their lives. You observe that rejection doesn't kill you. And slowly, session after session, your brain learns. Ah, this isn't dangerous. I can survive this. And the sensor begins to calibrate. The alarm starts to sound less. And you begin to regain your power. Now let's talk about time. Because time is where most people completely lose control. Ford had an obsession. He measured everything in time. How long it took to produce a part. How long it took to assemble a car. How much time was being wasted. And he discovered that small time optimizations generated exponential results. Reducing 1 minute in a process that repeats 1,000 times a day means gaining 1,000 minutes. Now look at your life. Where is your time going? And don't tell me you don't know. Pick up your phone now and look at your screen time from last week. You'll see terrifying numbers. 3 hours a day, 4 hours, 5 hours, scrolling through feeds, watching random videos, reading comments from people you don't even know. And you know what that means? It means that 1/3 of your waking life is being controlled by algorithms designed by engineers in Silicon Valley who have never seen you and never will. Think about it. You are literally donating your life, second by second, to companies that have profited billions from your attention. And you're not even getting anything in return. You're not getting any smarter. You're not getting any happier. You're not building anything. You're just consuming. Consuming content designed to keep you consuming. It's the perfect loop, and you're trapped in it. The Stoics had an exercise called memento mori. Remember death. It wasn't morbid, it was liberating. Because when you truly internalize that your time is finite, that every hour that passes is an hour you'll never get back, you begin to treat time with the respect it deserves. You start to ask, is this worth my life? Because that's what you're spending. Not minutes. Life. Irreversible chunks of your existence. Here's a time management protocol that will change your life. Every Sunday, you take a sheet of paper and divide it into 2 columns. In the first column, you write down everything you did in the past week that added real value to your life. It could be work that matters. It could be time with people you love. It could be exercise. It could be reading. It could be creating. But it has to be something that 10 years from now, you'll be proud of having done. In the second column, you write down everything that was pure waste. Purposeless scrolling, online discussions, worrying about things that didn't happen, comparisons with random people, and then you calculate what percentage of your week was real value and what percentage was waste. If you're honest, the number will shock you. But here's the important part. You don't do this to blame yourself. You do it to diagnose, to see where the leaks are in your factory. And then, week after week, you work to increase the value column and decrease the waste column. It's continuous improvement. It's the Ford philosophy applied to your life. Now, the hardest part. You need to confront the illusion of control, because there's a category of things you think you control, but you don't. And this illusion is consuming you from the inside. For example, you don't control whether you'll get rich. You control how much you work, how much you learn, how much you risk. But the final result depends on 1,000 variables outside of you. Market, luck, timing, connections. You don't control whether people will love you. You control whether you are a person worthy of love, whether you are honest, whether you are kind, whether you are present. But the other person's emotional response is in their head, not yours. You don't completely control your health. You control whether you exercise, what you eat, how much you sleep. But genetics, accidents, and chance are always on the table. And here's the liberation. When you stop trying to control outcomes and start focusing only on the process, you eliminate anxiety. Because anxiety comes from trying to control the uncontrollable. It comes from looking to the future and wanting guarantees that don't exist. The Stoics had a concept called amor fati, love of fate. It's not conformity, it's not giving up. It's understanding that what happens, happens, and your role isn't to fight reality. Your role is to use reality as raw material to build something. Ford took steel and turned it into cars. You take the events of your life and transform them into growth. You take failure and transform it into learning. You take rejection and transform it into selection. You take pain and transform it into wisdom. But this only works if you stop fighting what has already happened. Because fighting the past is the most idiotic waste there is. It's trying to change a piece that has already been manufactured. It's already come off the assembly line. It's already been sold. It's already been used. You can't change it. The only thing you can do is use the materials to build the next, better piece. Here's an exercise that will seem simple, but is profound. Every night before bed, take a notebook and write down 3 categories. Things I controlled today. Things I didn't control today and accepted. Things I didn't control today and fought against. Then analyze the things you controlled. Did you control them well? Did you act according to your values? Or did you react on autopilot? The things you didn't control and accepted, how did you feel? Light? Free? The things you didn't control and fought against, how much energy did you waste? How much anxiety did you generate? After a month of doing this, you'll have a complete map of your patterns. You'll see exactly where you're leaking power, where you're spending energy fighting windmills, and then you can start reprogramming. Line by line, pattern by pattern. There's a truth about discipline that nobody tells you because it's not marketable. Discipline isn't about being strong every day. Discipline is about having systems that work even when you're weak. Ford didn't depend on motivated workers. He created a system where even a demotivated worker produced results. The assembly line didn't stop because someone was lazy. It kept going. The system was bigger than the individual. Now apply that to your life. You can't depend on motivation. Motivation is a scarce resource. It comes and goes. Some days you wake up excited. Some days you wake up dead. If your life depends on motivation, you'll be productive 2 days a week and unproductive 5. You need systems, routines that run independently of how you're feeling. For example, you don't decide whether to brush your teeth. You brush them. Period. It doesn't matter if you're tired, sad, or demotivated. You brush because it's part of the system. You need to do the same with the things that really matter. Exercise, reading, creation, reflection. They can't depend on how you're feeling. They need to be part of the assembly line of your life. Here's how you install a fail-safe system. You start small, ridiculously small. You don't start by running for an hour a day. You start by putting on your sneakers. That's it. Put on your sneakers. Tomorrow you put on your sneakers and open the door. The day after tomorrow you put on your sneakers, open the door, and take 10 steps. Sound silly? Great. It's supposed to sound silly. Because you're not training your body. You're training your initiation system. The hardest part of any task isn't doing it. It's starting. It's overcoming inertia. So you train the hardest part in isolation. You remove all resistance. And after the starting circuit is installed, after putting on your sneakers has become automatic, then you add complexity. But never before. Because if you start hard, you'll depend on motivation. And when the motivation runs out, and it always does, you'll stop. And then you'll feel like a failure. And you'll reinforce the belief that you lack discipline. But the truth is, you just haven't installed the right system. Seneca, another Stoic, was one of the richest men in Rome. He had access to everything: luxury, power, pleasure. And yet, he periodically practiced voluntary poverty. He would spend days eating only bread and water, sleeping on the floor, wearing simple clothes. Why? Because he was calibrating his satisfaction system. He was training his mind not to need luxury to be happy, not to be controlled by external circumstances. And that's brilliant, because dependence is prison. If you can only be happy when you have comfort, you are a slave to comfort. If you can only be productive when you are inspired, you are a slave to inspiration. If you can only be yourself when people approve, you are a slave to approval. You need to train yourself not to need, not in a masochistic way, but strategically, so that when you have it, you appreciate it. But when you don't have it, you don't collapse. Here's a practical challenge you can start tomorrow. Choose something you use every day that isn't essential. It could be coffee, it could be social media, it could be music on your headphones, and spend a week without it, just 1 week. And observe the discomfort, observe the cravings, observe the thoughts that arise, and realize that you survive, that you continue to function, that you don't need it as much as you thought. And what you're actually doing is reclaiming power. You're proving to your mind that it's not controlled by external triggers, that you can say no, that you can choose, and every time you do this, you install another circuit of self-control. You strengthen the muscle of discipline, and slowly you stop being a slave to your habits and become the engineer of your own life. Now let's get to the final point. The most important thing. You need to define what you want your mental factory to produce. Because if you don't define it, it will produce anything. It will produce what advertising wants, what social media wants, what your boss wants, what your parents want, but not what you want. And then you'll reach 40, 50 years old and realize that you've built a life that isn't yours, that you followed a script that someone wrote for you. And there's nothing sadder than that. So I'm going to ask you the most important question in this video. If you were to die in a year, how would you use that year? Don't tell me you would use it the same way you're using it now. Because if the answer is yes, great, you're on the right track. But if the answer is no, then you have a problem. You're wasting your life. You're operating a factory that produces things you don't want. And worse, you're doing it consciously. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You could be fine right now if you only realized that you are. You already have everything you need to start regaining control. You have awareness. You have choice. You have time, at least for now. What you don't have is a guarantee. You don't have the guarantee that you'll have tomorrow. You don't have the guarantee that things will get better on their own. You don't have the guarantee that someone will come to save you. The only thing you have is now, this moment. And the question is, will you use this moment to continue being controlled by external forces, or will you use this moment to install the first circuit of self-control? Because that's how it works. It's not a magic transformation, it's a small choice. A choice that repeats itself. A choice that over time becomes a pattern. And patterns become systems. And systems become who you are. Here's the final protocol that ties it all together. Every morning, you sit for 5 minutes and answer 3 questions. First, what do I control today? Not what you want to control, what you actually control. Your choices, your reactions, your effort. Second, what do I not control today but will accept? The weather, other people's moods, the result of your work. Third, what system will I run today regardless of how I feel? Exercise, writing, reading, reflection, and then you close the notebook and go on with your life. But now you have a map. You know where your power lies. You know where it's pointless to fight. And you know what process will run. It doesn't matter if you wake up happy or sad, motivated or tired. The system runs. And at the end of the day, you review. Did I follow the system? Did I waste energy fighting the uncontrollable? Did I react or respond? And tomorrow you do it again. And the day after tomorrow. And on the 30th day, you won't recognize your own mind. You'll look back and realize you've installed something that wasn't there before. Real control. Not over the world, over yourself. If you've made it this far, I already know something important about you. You don't just want to survive your own mind, you want to master it. And that tells me you're exactly the kind of person who belongs in this community. This channel isn't about magical promises or overnight transformations. It's about real people sharing real tools that work in the real world. Every week, I bring a new perspective on how your mind works and, more importantly, how you can work with it, not against it. If this makes sense to you, subscribe to the channel. Not because I'm asking, but because you deserve to have a place where you can learn to build the version of yourself you always knew was inside. The next video is already ready, and I'm sure it will add another piece to the puzzle of your transformation. See you there.